Portion of God's Word before us this morning is from our second reading, which we read just moments ago. Let me read just a few of those verses near the end of our reading. But now I urge you to keep up your courage, because there will be no loss of life among you. Only the ship will be lost. In fact, last night an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood beside me and said, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and surely God has graciously given you all those who are standing with you. So keep up your courage, because I believe, God, that it will be exactly the way I have been told." It's a prisoner transfer. That's what's going on. Paul is part of a group of prisoners that are being transferred on to Rome. So it's not a maximum security prison by any means. It's not Alcatraz. It's not even really a minimum security prison. It's a normal prisoner transfer, one that's been done many times. And on that trip, one that was supposed to be the short journey across the sea, turned disastrous as a storm hit. Now we know Paul's life. It was a roller coaster. And during this roller coaster, we actually find Paul here being on this prisoner transfer. But the reason he's here is because when he was back in Jerusalem after his third missionary journey, all of a sudden, in Jerusalem, there's this anti-Christian mob and riot that takes place. So much so that the governor goes and gets Paul arrested. And now, as he's standing and waiting for trial, the governor, Felix, he's hoping to entice Paul to give him a bribe in order to release him. 2 years, Paul hung around waiting to have his day in court, refusing to give a bribe. And then a new governor comes into place. And Paul again is batted around like a little toy mouse that a cat is playing with. And the governor is actually ready to send Paul back to Jerusalem for him to stand and face his accusers in order to appease the accusers, where they would have an easier time putting Paul on trial. But even there, they actually planned on assassinating Paul on his trip back to Jerusalem. And so Paul did, which was his Roman right, because he wasn't making any headway with the governors, and because of this danger of his life, he made the appeal to the highest court in the land. He made his appeal to Caesar. Though the governor was, "Paul, are you out of your mind? There's no reason for you to do that." With all the frustration, the angst, anxiety that Paul was probably going through, and now to be told, "Paul, what are you doing? You're insane." And yet Paul had his trust in God. And he did what was his Roman citizenship right. And so now we see him being transferred. He was put into the hands of the centurion Julius, along with many other criminals and prisoners who were going to be transferred. It's put on a boat, and now they're at the island of Crete, and they're getting ready to make a short jaunt up to the port of Phoenix. But Paul makes a point, he goes, "It's not a good time to sail. We should stay here in Crete. We should make port here in Crete." He even gave a little bit of prophecy that God had given them. If they would sail, all would be lost. But it's a short trip. It wasn't that far. It's about 50-mile by boat that they were trying to go. And the weather looked really calm. Just a nice little southerly wind. And so they went into their plan, refusing to listen to Paul. And they started going. Boy, it didn't take long. And now comes a storm with hurricane-like winds. storm so strong it even was given a name, northeaster. I'll give you one clue of where the wind was coming from. And now they were blown off track. It was supposed to be an easy trip. It's supposed to be an easy journey. 50 miles is all they're supposed to go. Now they're going to actually find themselves hundreds of miles off course. Paul had warned them, stay here. Because you have to understand, sailing in the Mediterranean, there was a sailing time. From about May to September. If you were going to sail after September, it was extremely dangerous. In fact, they would encourage you not to do it. But if you would sail after November, it was suicide. Because of how dangerous the storms were. And yet they didn't listen. And all of a sudden now this northeaster hits. And now, fear for their life. They could not go against the wind, so they had to be taken by the wind well off course. Then all of a sudden they're dealing with some very shallow water. So much so that they have to lighten the ship in some way. So they do what every sailor hates to do. They start going off the cargo. That's their money. That's what funds them. And yet that's when they start going. You can already tell that they're in danger if they're going off the cargo. But it doesn't take long when all of a sudden they start going off the other tackle and other things that they need. Because they need to let them load. So dangerous is what's going on, and fear that the ship is going to break apart, that they actually take ropes and wrap ropes around it to hold all the boards and everything together. And they couldn't even navigate. So strong is the storm, so heavy are the clouds, they couldn't see the sun, they couldn't see the moon or stars at night. And now we're 14 days in, and whether it be because they threw the food over to the lane, or whether because the storm had ruined all the food they had eaten in a couple of days, and they are without hope. These experienced sailors, they're ready, they recognize they're not going to survive. That's where they are mentally. That's where they are physically. And then Paul stands up. Paul stands up and goes, guys, I told you to stay back in Crete. You didn't listen. Now, by no means was he saying that to say, I told you so. Though he could, but that's not why he did. He told them that to make sure that they listened to what was about to be said. I told you that this was going to be a bad sail if you left. But now that we're here, the angel came in. And he told me, the angel of the God whom I serve, he told me we're going to survive this. I still have to go and stand in front of Caesar, and not one of you will be lost. Keep your courage. Keep up your courage and trust in God. Not one of your lives will be lost. 276. 276 lives were not lost during that sea war. Yes, they had to run around on an island. That was going to happen. 276 lives were saved. Because God is in it. Paul had been batted around by the governors, by the government officials. Paul had gone through so many storms in his life, so many even physical storms. This is his third or fourth shipwreck. Paul stopped sailing. But this is something that Paul dealt with. He dealt with storms in his life the same way that we deal with storms in our life. Whether it be batted around by government officials as they try to force unbelief, forced false doctrine teachings on us, whether it be the anti-Christian mob that continues to back us around back and forth, whether it be being persecuted, ridiculed, but sometimes our storms aren't just in that way. Sometimes they're physical for us too. Sometimes they're personal. Whether it be storms of finances where we are struggling to pay the bills, whether it's a storm of health, battling a cancer, or battling some other frustration that builds and builds to a point where there feels like there's no hope. And yet when that happens, where do we turn? For those sailors, it was easy to turn to their own experience, to their own strength and power. They knew what it was to make it through this kind of storm. And yet it got to a point where even at that point, there was no making it through. Even with all their strength, even with all their experience, even with all of their knowledge, they weren't going to make it through the storm. Think about the disciples on the Sea of Galilee. How many of them were professional sailors, professional fishermen? And yet even then, with all their strength, with all their talent, with all their skill that they had on the sea, when that storm hit, when those winds were blowing and the water kept coming in, they were doomed. Where did they put their trust? Where did they put their hope? And all of the storms in Job's life finally got to a point where, Lord, where are you? But then God reminded Job. Jesus reminded the disciples. God, through the angel, reminded Paul and the sailors. Who's in charge? Were you there, Job? When I set the limits of the sea? Peace, be still, and all was calm. Paul, not one of those sailing with you will be lost. Who saves? In our life, with all of our storms, we have so much that is pounding on us. The wind is taking us so many different directions when it is pulling us off the course of our plans. It's so easy to fall into, I need to do, I need to correct, I need to fix. And yes, God absolutely blesses us with so much skill and talent and brains and knowledge and reasoning and experience, and yet when it comes to our life, who is the one in control? Who is the one we put our trust? Who is the one we put our hope? Because when storms hit and it feels like we are going nowhere, blown way off course, it's easy to fall in, just like those sailors did, just like those who were on that ship on the sea, on the Mediterranean Sea that day. It's easy to lose all hope. But who rescues? 276 were saved that day. God didn't calm that storm. Yes, he could have, right? Jesus has the power to calm wind and wave. He made sure that the disciples were saved. God here didn't calm the storm, but he still saved. Yes, it still meant the loss of their livelihood. It meant the loss of the ship, the loss of all of their cargo, but their life was so valuable to the Lord. The Lord saved them. In the same way that the Lord saves us. Yes, in our life we go through storms. Times where the physical sometimes takes a beating. Times where the physical is a point where we're going to lose our ship, our cargo. The Lord still saves you. Jesus rescued more than just physically. Think about poor Paul. Paul was rescued from another shipwreck, only to go and have to stand trial in front of Caesar, where he was going to be condemned and executed. And yet he put his trust and hope in God because Christ saved him. Not just from a shipwreck, but from an eternity. In the same way that God saves you. Yes, we go through storms in our life. But that's when we turn and put our reliance on Christ, on God. Not on our own power, not on our own strength, not on our own experience. But on Him who has the power to control wind and wave. On Him who is the one who put the seas in their place. On Him who made all things. On Him who saved you. The encouragement that Paul gave those sailors yesterday, all those who are on that ship, keep up your courage. Not courage in your own strength. Not courage in your own wisdom and experience. Not courage in your own know-how. But courage in the one who saves. The one who controls all things. The one who makes the storms calm. Courage in God. Courage in Christ. Keep up your courage through all the storms.